We're live.
Great.
Yeah. Jeff Lieberman, welcome to the Metagame.
Thanks, Daniel. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, we're recording this at Edge Esmeralda, which I still haven't found a good way to describe, but it's this pop-up city that we are participating in for Consciousness Week, and you've been giving a couple talks on your map of consciousness. I know you as the founder of Sleepawake, which I know a couple people have gone through and they found it to be a transformational experience. And so I'm wondering, maybe you could tell the listeners what that is as a starting point.
Sure. Thanks. Thanks for having me on the podcast.
Absolutely.
I was pretty depressed in high school and in college, and it took like 10 years to find my way through it, maybe a little longer even. And the mechanism started with me going to doctors and them telling me that my chemicals were off and that I needed other chemicals with these pills to fix my pathology, basically. And at the end of that 10 years, I came into the fact clearly that my depression was a natural and intelligent response to the environment that I was in, and it wasn't pathological. And I actually had to update my nervous system impressions from earlier in my life to get out of that depression. And that took so long to get under the hood of the Western world's approach to mental health, and I'm overgeneralizing, of course, that it led to this deep anger in the sense of like, this should not be,
right.
This should not be this difficult. And so after I felt out of that depression and I actually felt like I was thriving, it became really important to me to create an environment that was way more easeful for people to come into the intelligence of their bodies and their emotional system. And that got more and more coupled with a recognition of the fact that we've lost our rites of passage in the Western world. My rite of passage was a 2-hour bar mitzvah, and then they told me that I was an adult.
Right.
And when you really back out of, and I can talk rites of passage all day, we can get into the African rites of passage that like influenced my thinking around this, but what I got in touch with is that there's actually no proper preparation for adulthood. You are taught chemistry and you are taught the state capitals, and no one teaches you about authoring your own life and how to work with your emotions and how to work with conflict and setting boundaries and what the intelligence of the body is saying. And these are, as far as I'm concerned, utterly necessary components for thriving as an adult. And where are they? And it's basically a roll of the dice if you have a community that teaches you those things or not.
Right.
And so more and more, I was just like, there's a clear missing thing. And I looked around, and there's different programs that do different kinds of emotional work, but I just didn't see something that was multidimensionally well-rounded to cover all the dimensions of what you should learn to be an adult. And so in some sense, the most basic thing in the world, but it's also confronting a lot of material that we don't confront. And it's very challenging for people to lean into that work. And I would say it's scary work for a lot of people to lean into the stuff that we've spent a lot of our lives avoiding.
Yeah. And so you had your own journey with this, and at some point you realized that the standard solutions that were being given to you by the West were not working. And all of a sudden you discovered a whole other set to tune in to the natural intelligence of the body. What was that like? Was there an inflection point? Did you meet someone? How did you kind of cobble together this self-education if you didn't yourself have a rite of passage?
Yeah. There's been a lot of inflection points, but I would say the major inflection point was, and I'm sure we'll tie this in later to talking more consciousness-oriented stuff. So I'll say, like, I first thought about meditation, and I could tell that my depression was very rumination-based.
Right.
And as soon as I got in touch with the fact that, like, my mind is spinning, and that's what's causing a lot of these things to get magnified as problems, I was like, okay, I need to look inward. But I was such a staunch, I was a physicist and a mathematician by training, and I wouldn't even meditate until I read the neuroscience research that confirms that it creates changes that are positive in the brain and for well-being. And, so I was reading books like Buddha's Brain, and it was like, okay, there's deeper gratitude, there's deeper sense of well-being. So that was like a tiny first inflection point. And then after a couple of years of getting deeper into meditation, especially through the teachings of Nisargadatta Maharaj, who's from Bombay, amazing non-dual teacher, I noticed that I was accessing more and more of a sense of peace and silence underneath all the mental noise, but there wasn't joy. And so there was this peace, but not joy. And I feel really thankful at this point, looking back, that I could have gone deeper and deeper into that peace without needing to find that joy, but the joy was the missing parts of the body and the heart that weren't online.
Right.
And it's easy kind of in meditation to as teacher Francis Lucille says, he calls it using meditation as medication.
Yes.
And you can use it to dissociate further and further from the difficulty of the human complexity of being on earth, and the fact that you are going to die, and the fact that your relationships are going to end, and there's going to be blood, and it's easy to get away from that stuff, but then we feel muted all of a sudden, and we're like, why do I feel gray? Why is the average adult life gray with some resolution when we look at every one of us as a 4-year-old, and there's this like buoyant joy that's pouring and coursing through us, and we have normalized that that's what adulthood is, that's what happens. And that was part of the waking up. And so when I was in touch with this contrast of like, okay, there's all this peace here, but where's the joy? That's when I started to get into emotional healing work. And I ended up doing some sessions with a woman, Annalisa Edelberg, who many people might know in the Bay community, who does really deeply attuned, sensitive tracking of you and helps you feel through things that have been hidden. And I remember just like 15 minutes into the first session, just bawling my eyes out. I hadn't cried like that in years. And I left. And when I left, my perceptual system had changed and the world looked crisper and brighter. And I was more in my body, and I started crying tears of joy. I want to start crying right now. It's like huge turning point. And it was like, oh yeah, like the body matters here. My body and my heart matter. And all these things that I have felt that I've put away have constantly grabbed parts of my aliveness and put those away as well. And you can't get the joy back without letting all the other stuff back. And this is the kind of weird like rule I think we have misinterpreted. We think happiness is the loss of sadness, and that it's the loss of anger and all that. And it seems more and more clear to me over time that it's the welcoming and lack of resistance to all that stuff coming in, and knowing how to channel it, channeling anger, not by yelling at somebody, channeling it by doing what Gandhi did and saying, no, this isn't okay. But he didn't never yell about it. He was just clear about how to channel his clarity. Feeling the depth of sadness and letting that get us back in touch with the gratitude of what's here and the sacredness of what's here. You can't have the gratitude if you're not welcoming the sadness.
Right.
And we're in this kind of relationship of pushing those things away, thinking that doing that enough is going to lead to the happiness and the joy.
And a lot of people can approach meditation that way, and then it becomes just another tool for avoiding this deep well of somatic pain.
Yes. And where you find out is in relationships and challenges there. And, Stephen Kessler is an amazing therapist and teacher. And he says, I don't end up doing a lot of work with monks, but I do a lot of work with their partners because there's a lot of frustrations coming up about the dissociation. And these things manifest in shadow. And we have so many stories over the last 100 years of spiritually amazing teachers who their shadow elements create chaos in their community and assault and all these things that like pop out. And it's like, okay, this person has not felt through shadow material. And I don't say that from a perspective of like, I'm done with my shadow material. I have a lot of shadow material that I'm still working through. But it's the recognition that it's there and the wanting to be in a community where that gets reflected to me so that I can continually be in deep honesty with myself about it.
How much of this misapprehension that people have towards meditation-like practices is a function of individualism? Like the fact that we're not in relationship with a bunch of other people. And the reason why I ask this is because I feel like it's very hard to avoid your shadow elements if you are deeply embedded in community and people are triggering you left and right, and you realize that there's things that you're getting an outsized emotional reaction to. But it seems quite common that people have this journey where they do a bunch of inner work or self-work, but never really tune into the felt senses that they're avoiding in the body. So to what extent is this a function of individualism or just being atomized and isolated from community?
Yeah, it's a great and very deep question. I think individualism amplifies the problem, but is not the problem on its own. I'd say even if you have a community and even if you're getting triggered, if your whole community is based on conflict avoidance, then it doesn't solve the problem by having that community. It actually reifies that you should put these elements away and that you can't be in continual evolution of your relationship. So many of these aspects of self only come up in relationship. So the individualism like prevents us from getting those triggers and working through those triggers. But But when those things come up, there have to be a set of norms in the community and in the culture by which to metabolize them.
Yeah.
And that's where a lot of these kind of teacher relationships get off, because there's a certain that teacher only has hierarchical relationships where the reflection only goes one direction,
Right.
and then that person gets more and more separated from the communal tribe. So one of the things that we do, I would say it's the core thing that makes Sleepawake Camp work, is that we instantiate very explicitly what the norms are. And then we give people exercise after exercise, after experiment, after game after game, to lean more deeply into what happens if all of us are following those norms. You know, like a norm, no gossiping. If you have a thing, you bring it to the person directly. And if someone starts gossiping to you, you say, it seems like you're getting gossipy. Like, can I help you address this with the person? You know, no shaming, no clicks, like all these kind of elements. When you actually just foster them and you create a sense of deeper, oh, I can bring this thing that my nervous system says is dangerous, and then I can actually have a rep of finding out it's not dangerous. That's the thing that remaps our family patterning. You know, Irvin Yalom is the father of like group psychotherapy. And he has an amazing book called Group Psychotherapy. It's like a huge tome. But he says one of the main curative factors in group psychotherapy is disconfirming evidence. You have all these expectations of relationships. And when you do work in groups, you try things, and then the thing that comes back is not what you're expecting. And what's so powerful about it is it's not a conceptualism. It's not an idea that you're expecting. It's a nervous system response that you're expecting. I grew up incredibly conflict avoidant, and I still lean towards conflict avoidance because it's in my blood.
Right.
Conflict didn't work well for me. So when I first was invited to lean into conflict, it wasn't a conceptual thing. It was like, of course, I know I should be able to bring these challenges to people in relationship. It was my nervous system expecting death on the other side. And that's the kind of thing that needs to be retrained. And so, yeah, to kind of tie it back to your question, individualism is of course, a magnifier of that. And it solidifies these ideas and ideals that the one person is the unit, and that's what you should do. But that's only going to take care of a certain subset of things in one's life.
Yeah. And some of it is the culture itself that you might be surrounded by could be perpetuating these bad patterns. I think it might be helpful if you, to the extent that is appropriate, because I know some of it you want people to discover as they go there, but what is like the structure of Sleepawake, and how does it address some of these things with group work?
Yeah, no, I love that question. And of course, there's some details I would leave out for priming reasons.
Exactly,
but,
yeah.
I'd say it's a mix. So I can say every day there's certain practices where you do things like you get in groups and you share exactly what's going on for you that day. And just you get a chance to be witnessed in a non-judgmental space. That's a really good baseline practice. I recommend that everyone that's in a kind of community living environment has like a 2-minute check-in every morning of like, what's here right now that I can share. And there's no response. There's just being witnessed and feeling the nervous systemness of that. That's okay. So we have baseline practices that go through the whole immersives. And then we really do this, what I said, multidimensional look at all the dynamics of being. And so I can kind of list them. What are the nervous system principles that lead to a sense of safety, and studying that? How do I tap more deeply into what my needs and wants are moment by moment and know them from my body instead of from my ideas, and separate that, which is very new for a lot of people? How do I sense the difference between me and other people and not take on other energy and differentiate what's mine and what's not mine, and also set boundaries based on that information also coming from my body? How do I deepen my level of authentic relating with other people underneath the mask and role that I think I need to play to have people connect with me, so I can learn that authentic me is actually available and gets a much deeper feeding of connection, which also, to tie it into the individualism thing, it's like when we live in a hyper-individual environment, we play these masks and we forget that they're not us. They get so caked into our face. And so what happens is we try to play them as well as possible to get connection. And the only thing that's getting connection is the mask. And so this is where the loneliness epidemic comes from. We're so craving it that we're playing a harder role to try to get it met.
Yeah.
And a heart never gets met. And it's so heartbreaking because the effort that people are making and trying to connect is so deep. But if you're doing it from a place of what do I need to do to connect, you're actually not actually with yourself anymore.
Mm-hmm.
So we do a lot of work around that. Like, how do I bring a deeper level of my realness to the situation and get reflection that actually is okay and that gets met.
Can you give a little example of that? Like, I imagine that's something that would resonate with a lot of people, this sense that they can't be their full self when they're around others. And sometimes they might even have awareness around that. They might realize, oh, I'm performing,
Mm-hmm.
or, oh, I feel with this particular group of friends, I got to show up in this particular way.
Mm.
And they might even realize in the moment that they're in that loop, but they might not know what to do.
Yeah.
Can you give people a sense of a different move that might be available to them?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, it's scary though.
Yeah.
The scary thing is usually really, really direct. So in this case, it might be I'm in my group of friends and I say, hey, I feel like I'm performing with you guys to get connection. Like, do any of you feel like that? Or are we all like efforting somehow to try to get this? Or is it just me? You know, what do you guys expect of me in our connection, in our relationship? And what I find time and time again, and of course I work with the people that want to do this work. So there's plenty of people that don't want to do this work. But what I find time and time again is that is almost a universal craving towards more realness.
Yeah.
And everyone in the circle is afraid to say it first because of the fear of rejection. And so if I can take a second and really honor when you're a social mammal like a human being is, and you're a child that's utterly dependent on the tribe for your survival, rejection equals death.
Mm-hmm.
And I say that to really normalize, like, the feelings that come up of like, what if I am more vulnerable? They can feel like terror. They can feel like death. And I just want to say it to normalize it. It's because it was. That's in our blood. It's in our nervous system. If I say this thing and people look at me, showing me that they're judging me, I'm going to die. And that's a very strong feeling, right? So I have a lot of compassion for the multitudes of people that won't ever ask a question like that of their friends from 10 years, you know, can be really devastatingly terrifying to bring in. But usually the vulnerable things right there. It's just that it's scary to actually do. Right. You know, right when you said it, it was like, oh yeah, just say that out loud. It's not like a mystery what to do. It's just share the scary thing.
I get this sense with this stuff, and maybe a bunch of other ways in which we get in our own way as we're developing, that you get a lot of value from simply making truth like a fundamental value between you and the people in your life. And so if you have the type of relationship where you've pre-committed to being honest with one another explicitly, and this is something I've done with friends where we shake on it. We're like, this is a relationship that's oriented towards the truth as best as we can articulate it. That gives you the space. It gives you the pretense to actually say some of these direct things, and it makes this whole thing way easier. And so I keep coming back to, you know, recent conversations I've had on this podcast, that sometimes pursuing truth, goodness, and beauty for its own sake is like a good heuristic when you're stuck. And we can get, you can get all philosophical about what those things are, but I think most people have an instinct. If you tune into the present moment, there is an instinct for what is more of a lie, what is more of a truth, what is more good, what is more beautiful. And you can train that instinct over time. Like, maybe it's underdeveloped, but following that, in my experience, gets you pretty far. And I'm curious if you have a reaction to that.
Yeah. And I would say for people that kind of get locked into too concretely when they think about things like truth, an alternative, we use this word in communities of friends that I'm with, blip, which is that feeling of like you're in a conversation and someone says something, and then all of a sudden there's a twist in your gut about something that just happened doesn't feel fully okay. And the moment there, it's not that I have to orient towards a philosophical idea of truth, but it's toward internal coherence in relationship.
Yes.
And that's an easier, for me, that can get lost in here, it's just an easier metric. It's like, I'm incoherent if something came up and I can't bring it into the relationship to become coherent again. And so that just becomes a pretty straightforward pointer towards that kind of truth that you're pointing to. But I think what you're also saying on a meta level is cultural norms again. Yeah. You are explicitly shaking on, we are going to actually validate our reality to a deeper level, even when that thing is sometimes hard to hear. And saying that up front, I mean, that's the kind of stuff we do. And we do specific exercises on saying the difficult thing when it's coming from a loving place instead of coming from, I'm pissed off at you. And those are incredibly powerful sessions. And people realize like there's super deep chunks of wisdom in our communities that are not getting leveraged because of this like ability to reflect one another, because we have different systems.
Mm-hmm.
And if you live in a cave, you're never going to find out about the aspects of your system that are really unique to you. You're just going to like clear out your internal stuff.
You mentioned saying things from a loving place. For someone who isn't 100% sure what the referent is of a loving place, how might you prompt their intuition there?
Yeah, great question, because you can really screw this one up, obviously.
Yeah.
It's a very easy pitfall. I would say the main pointer that we give when we talk about lessons like that is if you are about to sit with someone and give them some kind of reflection that's like a hard truth, and you want them to change, it's not the right time. If you're actually compassionately like really seeing them and loving them as they are, let me not use loving them, you're appreciating them exactly as they are, and you see something that actually might help them help themselves out of something that's causing difficulty in their life, but it's not for your benefit, then it's more clean.
Yeah.
But it's that in fact itself takes tuning in. And a lot of the stuff that we do, what we hear time and time again, we do data studies on people, longer term. And one of the things that happens that's underlying all of our curriculum is sensing into the body.
Mm-hmm.
And this is a lost art in the Western world because we have years and decades of like therapy is just up here and it doesn't involve the body. And it takes a long time to sometimes relearn that this is constant information. And so the ability to tune in and say, oh, is this actually for my benefit or am I trying to change them? And like that's itself an antenna that needs to be trained. So it's not automatic. Like you're like clear that you want to change them or something like that. That itself takes refinement and trust and experimenting. And, that's why I think it's so interesting to have a laboratory environment where everyone is experimenting together. And we try to set it up so that it's like people always are saying like, wow, 2 days into this, I'm closer to people than I have been with 10-year-old friends because of the different norms of like really being real right away.
Yeah. You mentioned tuning into the intelligence of your body when you were talking about your own journey with depression.
Mm-hmm.
And then, it's obviously coming back up now. This is a theme that's come up in a bunch of previous episodes as well, that there are things in modernity that orient us out of our bodies. Even just as simple as like screens and your phone, and the fact that the way we apprehend the world is very propositionally oriented. Like we use concepts, we use language in order to make sense of things, as opposed to participation or intuition. This is something I think that's kind of tricky to also point to with language. But I imagine that you've experienced tons of people coming through Sleepawake that are at different starting points with their embodiment journeys. I'm curious, what works, how do you invite somebody to listen to what's happening in their body? If they think that they already are doing that and they don't really know what the hell you're talking about.
Totally. I love that you brought that question in, and I'll give you the one quick trick that fixes it all. Come and stay tuned. Let me say an experiment people could run, and then we can run a little micro experiment and talk about it. One thing that people really downgrade as a source of intelligence is sensitivity to others being in their space. And so what I really recommend people try is something we do like on day one of these programs is you stand across from someone that's 30 feet away and you tell them when to come closer and when to go further away. And you feel how that changes the sensitivity in the body moment by moment. And literally many people can tell the difference between 30 feet and 29 feet. And we don't even remember that that's happening because we move so fast. So you slow it down and you're like here, and you bring them like right up to here, and you feel all of the different changes in your nervous system. And that starts to wake up like, whoa, this is all that animals had for 400 million years before this little mind started getting conceptual in the last 100,000. So there must be really deep intelligence, because that is the only thing that created response is how the body felt, right? Literally the word emotion means creating motion to move us. It's the feeling that moves us. When we're an animal and a dog, all it does is feel emotion and do the thing. And it's quite intelligent. It's quite able to take care of what it needs to take care of in its life. And we just like override it with the sensitivity here. So a little micro experiment. We're kind of on the edge of it, but if I'm right here, we're pretty naturally in a conceptual mental space with one another. This is a pretty natural space that the mind comes online and we're talking ideas and we're feeling that. So just feel that with me for a second. We're just like here, we're jamming on ideas, right?
Yeah.
If I move 2 feet closer to you, we enter an emotional realm that's different and it just feels different.
Yeah.
And naturally, my body wants to slow down. And it wants to feel the feeling that's happening here when I'm feeling you attending to me, attuning to you. And that circuit slows both of us down into an emotional space. It's automatic. And I think it's pretty universal if someone's like open to slowing it down, that there's different channels of information happening. And I can in real time come back here and it's like it widens out and let's speed it up a little. Let's get in ideas. So people can play with things like distance and start to really wake up the sensitivity that's been there the whole time.
Yeah, I felt it immediately. Like it's almost like the front of my body lights up a little bit. And then also just the fact that you're so much more in focus. It's almost like concepts are always floating around up here. And then if your face is more in focus, I don't tune in as much to the concepts. That's kind of how it felt.
Yeah, there's an immediacy into the body emotional mechanics that are always at play.
Yeah.
But if we're 10 feet away, it's a whole different vibe.
Yeah. So I don't know if there was more you wanted to say about Sleepawake in terms of the structures or techniques.
I can really quickly, like I was being authentic, being more real.
Let's finish that.
And I actually when I talk about this stuff, I use the map that I've been working on to remind me of the dimensions, because otherwise it's like of the infinity of things. But after like authentic being and relating with one another authentically, a lot of it is about developing the uniqueness of the expression of yourself and your voice. And that involves creative work, doing work with singing and places where people are really terrified. But in my work, open your singing voice has nothing different than being able to have a brainstorming meeting in your business. If you're not available to look dumb and to feel stupid and be seen fully, you're never going to be out of the box with ideas. So creative work is really deep in the programs. Visioning work, actually letting yourself from an expanded state feel into what is most alignment with you for your life. And then self-awareness, metacognition, taking a deeper stock of what is going on inside you. Those are the main dimensions that I would say we cover.
Yeah, and I think maybe as an anchor, it'd be interesting to tell the listeners about the name Sleepawake. And this could be a good transition into talking about consciousness. But
cool.
I asked you the other day, like, why did you call it Sleepawake? And you said it's a play on these sleepaway camps. And then...
Yeah, happy to talk about it. I went to Sleepaway camp for years as a kid, like 2 months out of the summer, sleeping, residential programs in Maine. And so Sleepaway camp is a classic phrase that some people don't know anymore, but it's like, it's a classic phrase. And Sleepawake camp, I like puns. And this pun connected with Sleepaway camp that I loved growing up because this started as a month-long residential summer program, like a camp. And it also connects to this notion from the depths of Tibetan Buddhism, where they talk about getting such a deep sense of awakeness that it permeates all states of consciousness. So people know about lucid dreaming. They know about going to sleep and staying awake in some weird paradoxical way. But the Tibetans go further and they say, actually, you can be so aware and so awake that the dream ends and you're still awake in deep dreamless sleep. And Western world has not caught up with this one at all. But I know people that do this. It's not a metaphor. It's not a lie. It's a real phenomenon that's very, very well understood in the Tibetan lineage. And soon there'll be neuroscience research on it if there isn't already. So I wanted to use that as a pointer to how awake can one be to their life, to the things they're not noticing in their body, to the elements of their personality they're ignorant of, to the relationships that are possible, and just this pointer to like full awareness to everything that's possible in this life.
Let's talk about your map of consciousness.
Sure.
You just referenced it a moment ago. There's like the 7 Levars, which we'll explain. And you gave a couple talks about it this week. I think what I found somewhat perplexing in the beginning was why someone would want a map of consciousness to begin with. So maybe that could be a good place to start. So what is a map of consciousness, and why do we even need one?
Yeah. It took me years. I had these questions in my mind about what's going on as a human being, and it took me years to even have any answer to that question and to start to tune into it. And then it became this like forest fire. We use maps for everything. Like most people use a map almost every day now to get around, right? And maps help us wayfind in complex territory, right? So I'm in a town that I've never been to before, and I have no problem getting around because I have something showing me the way around. The human experience is infinite in what could happen, but there's structures involved in it. And we don't learn a kind of a reference to like what describes all the structures of the human experience. So if you ask one person, they'll say, okay, I know I have like thoughts and emotions. But is that complete? I don't know. I haven't been taught what the rest of the world is. And obviously, if you look at the sensory streams, you have, seeing, hearing, touch, and you have proprioception, and you have vestibular sense of balance. And there's something like 12 of these senses that are coexisting as the input streams of data. But that's clearly not fully explanatory either to what's going on, because I also have thoughts, and those aren't the same as my hearing, although there's some weird overlap, right? And so the more I asked people, what's the complete picture of the dimensions of what's possible in a human being? No one had an answer. And I was like, man, like how much time do we spend learning the periodic table and spend on Google Maps and like learning about the ways to get around the objective world and build materials and things? And we don't have any understanding of what's going on in our experience. And there's still a question of like, well, why would you need that? And what I find is that when you have an exhaustive list, and this is a 7-dimensional list. So there are only 7 things to remember, just like a scale or just like Roy G. Biv on the rainbow. It's short enough that you can gain intuition. And when you start looking at this map and you say, actually, everything is some relationship between these 7 dimensions, the infinity becomes tractable all of a sudden. And I can get an intuition. And I can start to see that like, oh, all this variety are these 2 dimensions interacting with one another. Oh, and thought is actually downstream of audio. And thought is in some sense a hallucination of audio that I've internalized from external auditory hearing. So it's like all these links start forming and they create a deeper intuition. And then when you start to look at it exhaustively, it creates these entirely new questions that come up about the nature of your existence. Because you start to realize things like my personality is not the same as my body. The fact that the Jeff is here that's meeting you, that has a history and has a sense of like, I give talks or I travel to conferences, that has nothing to do with this body, which is just a present moment set of experience that's going on. And when I differentiate those two, but I notice I call both of them me, then there's these new question marks which say things like, well, which one is my real identity if either of them? Are both of them? Why do I call both of them I? And so when you start to look at something exhaustively and start gaining intuition for it, it generates a whole new set of questions that I think are really potent and powerful questions that led me into scientific theories around spirituality. And that was a game changer for me.
Yeah. And I will say, going through the presentation, and we'll go through these 7 dimensions, cool. But going through the presentation, I noticed it had a direct effect on my experience because you're listing these 7 dimensions and then I'm tuning into that like tranche of my current experience.
Yeah.
And then I'm able to disambiguate it from like everything else. And a few talks this week did this for me, but as I'm gaining knowledge, I'm also like by the end of the presentation, my consciousness is also shifting because it's like someone is like tuning your awareness to the different dimensions of your experience. So I think it has the capacity for insight in kind of like the scientific sense, where you use the map as like a starting point to understand something about conscious experience. But it also had like direct insight in the sense that having someone light up these aspects of what you're actually always experiencing can help you put them as like an object in consciousness as opposed to be subjected to them, like to use the term Mike Johnson reference. But maybe we can go through these. You said there's 7 dimensions.
Totally.
It's pretty short. It fits in short-term memory. Let's start with number 1.
Yeah, I'd actually recommend we go backwards.
Oh, perfect.
Because 1 is the most subtle in some sense, and it might be easiest to kind of like take things apart. But let me just think about that for 1 second. No. Let's try what you said. And then we can play with it. But I first would say, like, I'm really glad that you took it as a psychoactive experience.
Yeah.
It's and I have my website, The Open Source Life, has a much longer exposition where it gets much more into experiments with each dimension, so people can really feel and take the time to feel it. This was kind of lightning talks, 30 minutes to go through the whole entirety of a human experience. It was an interesting challenge to write. But yeah, it's only as useful as it corresponds to actual real lived experience. And so if it stays as a concept, it's not doing its job. So yeah, I invite anyone that's listening to this to try to tune in to exactly what you were tuning into.
Almost like a guided meditation in a way.
Yeah, totally. It's and for people that are like rationally minded or scientifically minded, for me, the whole purpose of this is it creates this major bridge that for some reason doesn't exist for most people, that connects all the conceptual understanding that I have with my actual direct experience, which is the most real thing that I know in some sense, right? I only actually know that this is a candle because I'm seeing and touching it. It comes from my experience of it. It doesn't start as a candle in a void, right? And we know this from physics. We know these things don't actually exist fully until they are in perception and experience. So anyway, we can get theoretical after. Let's go through the Levars, and we can talk about why it's called Levars. Let's go through the dimensions of the map. The first one is that there has to be a place. It's a placeless place. It's a weird to speak to, but I have to be awake to be having any detailed experience. And so the first dimension is just wakefulness that has no structure yet. It has no data. We all know there's this feeling of like something wakes up in the morning. And before I even take in like, oh, I'm Jeff, I'm in my bedroom, like all the data, there's the wakefulness that comes online. And so the first dimension is just this sensory wakefulness.
The fact that the lights are on.
Yeah, the light is on. Yeah. Exactly. I love that phrase. And my friend Brian was reminding me, that's like such a simple way to point to it. The light was off a minute ago.
Yeah.
And it's on.
Yeah.
And we conflate that with all the content coming in. But it's like, if you really disambiguate it, it's like, okay, first the light has to be on. Once the light is on, all the sensory streams are sending raw data into this light, right? And so that's where all the different senses come in. So I have a whole visual stream happening right now. I have all the sensations that I understand as my body, but I don't yet know them as my body. There's just the raw feeling of the body. There's sound happening, but I haven't interpreted it yet. There's the proprioceptive system, the vestibular system, all that kind of stuff, but it's raw. It's the raw, unanalyzed, unplaced data of perception.
Maybe a clue for this is like, if you're looking at a room, like visual data, before you even conceptualize the objects in the room, there's like color and light and texture and like all these, like the substrate that you then interpret into an object. Is that
exactly? And you could say like a single pixel of that information already has color before it's a thing that has a color.
Yes.
And it's weird this way because the way we actually build the world is from these little microscopic pieces that we then have to build a model for how to put them all together. But this is happening so fast and so low level in our perception, we don't usually disambiguate it out.
Yeah.
And I love how much you were listening and paying attention because now you're able to teach it probably.
Yeah.
So yeah, you have these really low level structures that start to come in after color, like edge detection. And that's already moving toward the third dimension. The third dimension is the structures that come out of that raw perception. And the main structure that comes out of all of that perception is a coordinate system, a point of view, a sense of perspective. And this is the body. This is the idea, the perceptual arising experience of being right here, right? It's plain as day. I'm not talking about esoteric things. This is not esoteric. This is like every moment of your day, you have this feeling of where am I? And I feel right here. If I try to localize it, I'm like an inch or two behind my eyes. And I know there's no truth to that. There's not like a little guy in there that lives there. It's just brain matter like all the other brain matter. So I know that that's a computation that I'm making out of the raw data of experience. And what I'm doing is I'm finding the most computationally efficient way to organize all of this data into one picture that is coherent. And so if you imagine like if I just had edges and colors, and I'm literally millions of these every second, if not billions of pieces of information of those little low-level things like edges, how would I get any information that's useful out of that? You know, I'm in kind of jellyfish land when I'm just in the raw perception of things. I don't have a centralized nervous system yet. So now I have a point that I'm at that says, here I am, and now I'm surrounded by a world of objects. And this is identification with the body. And now all of a sudden there's a room. And now all of a sudden Daniel is 3 feet away from me. So I have like distance labels, and that's space. That's spatial perception. That's not in your visual system on its own. That's not in the data of the orange pixels that I'm seeing on your skin. It's me constructing space and time. And it's the construction also of a present moment. You know, a jellyfish, in my deepest understanding of it at this point, doesn't experience like a now. It's so in the data. It hasn't like become here looking at now, but me and you very much have a feeling of like now is happening. And this is the data of now, and it's changing from now, you know? So that's the third dimension.
The point of view is the third dimension.
Exactly.
And that's a construct. That's something that we put as an interpretive schema on top of the raw data. The one thing that's kind of trippy about this one for me is like, I have a point of view from this side of the room, and I see you over there, and I see the rest of the room over there. And then you have a point of view that's the other side of the room. If I were to deconstruct my point of view, I'm not going to get the raw sensory data that you are getting on the other side. Totally. So can you clarify that for me? It's not like there, it's almost sounds like there's something that is already going to be there as like a pre-point of view or a vantage point, or like a given set of raw sensory data that I have access to, or this corner of consciousness has access to that corner of consciousness doesn't, or you have like a different one. But then you're saying the point of view is a construct on top of that. So help me make sense of that. It's
a really great question, a very deep question. So I'm going to answer it like shallow right now, and after maybe we circle back. Perfect. So there's two kind of sub questions in your question. One of them is, there's something going on here that is something you don't have access to, and there's something going on there that I don't have access to. So let's just take that as a given. The data streams are different. And what I'm saying here is that both of us, regardless of the data stream, are computationally creating it in a space-time coordinate system. We're taking that data, and our visual cortexes have overlapping kinds of computation because the data corresponds to that computation. And so, of course, with different data, we have a different perspective on this room. And even though later on we define this as a room that we're both in and all that, but absolutely, right? We have different data. And that's like a very obvious given from anyone's perspective. And so there's not a need for our point of views to be the same, but the mechanism of constructing a point of view is the same.
Right.
And that happens regardless of the data stream. Later on, when you go into deep Tibetan Buddhism, you can talk about the fact that underneath all of it, there isn't actually a separateness here, but there's these local pockets of view. And that's a much more subtle concept to get in. So we can kind of put that aside for now.
Yeah, let's flag that.
Yeah.
Okay. So we're at point of view.
We're at point of view.
What's next?
Now, when I have a point of view, and you can equate this to like body consciousness, right? Now, when I feel sensations in my knee, I'm feeling them like from here, my knee is over here and it's me, but it's there, right? Which is interesting itself when you start to spend time with it. The visual of you is not me, but the visual of my hand is me. So I'm actually starting to differentiate all of the data in terms of what I call me and what I call not me. That's all happening on 3. Once I do that, and I actually have a body, and then I can identify other things in the environment as other bodies, is the first time I can have a relational space of flow of feeling connection and disconnection from those bodies. And that's where emotion comes from. Emotion, and there's there's subtleties in all of this stuff. Obviously, we're compressing this a lot. But if I don't identify you as a thing in a world that is separate from me, I can't possibly have a detailed relationship with you. But once I do identify you as a human being and I start to read your facial expressions and we are in communication, then all of a sudden I have this flow of like, how connected am I and how disconnected am I? And I would say at its root, on a survival level, it's like If I'm connected, I'm safe. If I'm disconnected, I'm not safe. But once I have a baseline of safety, there's all that flow of connection that we all know in any conversation we're having. There's like either it's feeling good and it's feeling like it's connecting us, or it's not. That's the fourth dimension. It's this tribal mammalian aspect of our perception and our consciousness that is the flow of emotion. And it's once again, all these things are not esoteric. They're everyday. And when I moved in here and got closer, there's a feeling that changes. And that feeling comes from the senses of the body that are on two.
Mm-hmm.
But it's an overlay. It's an interpretation of that. Once again, computationally, that's interpreting as like, oh, I'm moving toward this person and it feels good, or I want to get away from this person and it feels bad. So that's the flow on 4.
And so it's an abstraction on the raw data that is made possible by the fact that we have separate points of view, which allows the experience of like distance and closeness and safety and risk, and emotions are kind of like the experience of that, how connected and close I feel with someone, how distant I feel from someone, and how much like safety and risk I feel in general.
Yeah, I think you said it really beautifully. The one thing I'd kind of, all these things come from the raw canvas. And so it's all made out of the same stuff, and it's different layered computations that are happening on that, right? And so as you said, once I can perceive already the structure of this and this, now there can be a relationship.
Mm-hmm.
And the flow of relationship is the flow of emotion.
Mm-hmm.
But notice there's like, if I'm a really early like reptile or something like that, I can still have a fear response to a snake, but it doesn't need to be because I'm detecting it as a snake. I can just see a certain red and brown pattern in my perceptual view and move away from it. And so there's a kind of a proto-emotion in perception. But once I actually identify objects like you and me, now we can have a much more rich flow. And it's way beyond just survival. It's into like the moment by moment sense of connection that we can have, and the kind of tribal connection that mammals have.
So just so I understand, is emotion always a function of relationship?
That's a great phrasing of the question. And I would say yes. And the proto-emotions that I'm talking about are when the relationships are not between two bodies, but it's literally just a raw perception that is informing a repulsion.
Right.
And I see a brown and red pattern, and I move away. And I don't have to have the architecture of knowing that that's a snake.
Yeah.
And this is where all these kind of things, especially the lower dimensions, they're so subtle, and we're so on, in this case, like Levar 6, thinking about stuff, which is so complex, but we are spending most of our time there, that it can be really hard to like let that relax and feel into like, what was this world like 200 million years ago when there were none of those computations, but things were just fine. Jellyfish do amazing in their life, but it's very simple life compared to ours. It has a lot of overlap, and then we have all these other structures that have taken over. And so it can just to kind of like nod to the subtlety of these earlier dimensions in our evolution.
Yeah. So what comes after emotion?
So then I develop a deeper hardware architecture to keep memory in my system. If you look at like early reptiles, frogs, and things like that, they don't have a great system of learning. There's some things they can learn, and there's some really weird, freaky experiments we can talk about that show that they can't learn. So now we have a memory architecture. A human being can remember millions of experiences, right? And so what it does is it has this sense of me and you, and then it starts to make all these correlations from its memory. It says, actually, when I did this thing in this group of people, it felt really bad and disconnecting. And so now I can remember that. Like, for example, I gave talks this week, and I can say, okay, I've given probably 60 talks in my life, and they've largely been very connective experiences. So when I'm in front of an audience, it feels exciting, and I have a positive emotion. But that's partly because I'm overlaying my memory and my past of all those experiences, and I'm pattern detecting, what is this like? Oh, this is like giving a talk. And that's like all these other 59 talks. And so I'm going to be more inclined to treat this as good. But anyone that has a fear of public speaking knows that they could be looking at the same exact thing I'm looking at and having a very different experience, right? And it's not because the room is different, it's because their historical overlay is different. So once you have this architecture of being able to hold a memory and bring a sense of continuity through time to the present moment, that is what the personality is. And that is a little of a mental jump, but it's like the personality can be defined as all of your historical connections with what is good and bad for you in terms of connection and safety. And so different from just the body is the Jeffness that's here. That's 47 years old, and we can spend hours and hours talking about every experience that I've had that's emotional, and every reaction I have to the present moment is informed by those experiences. It's not just raw. It's not just taken here as fresh. And there's a deep utility to that, because when you're growing up in a house and you have to learn what you have to do to get connection, it's great to be able to learn that. And then the challenge becomes, we think that the rest of our life is still in that house and still in that community. And so this is where a whole different level of conditioning and trauma response can come. That's not just the trauma of like losing an arm on the physical level. It's the trauma of like, I had to get good grades to be connected in my house. I'm not saying that's true for me. I'm saying that's a classic kind of conditioning. And then when I go out and I'm 30 years old, I think I better start the company. But the secret reason I'm doing that is because I still think that's what's going to get dad's connection.
Yeah.
That's the fifth dimension. That's the personality.
Yeah. And so your personality is made possible by episodic memory. But what's not obvious from that, so when I think episodic memory, I'm thinking of something quite cognitive, but tying it back into what we talked about with the body and also the trauma that you mentioned. Where, like, how do you make sense of personality when it comes to things that, like, emotions that haven't been processed? Is that it's episodic memory and something else, or like what is your frame for making sense of even the idea that the body keeps the score?
Yeah, really complex question. And the whole podcast could be about that one question. I'll say a couple things. The first thing I'll say is the personality is incredibly useful technology, right? Being able to like store all these different memories, correlate what is useful for connection, knowing that if I suddenly start screaming at you, that's a bad idea in our culture and it's not going to create connection. Like those things create norms. And I also need an organizing principle for how to orient that depends on the past and the future, right? I have to know to show up here on time to talk to you. I can't do that just with an emotional system. I have to have a schedule that tells me we've planned this in the past and it orients me. Excuse me. So a lot of this data is really rich and valuable in terms of taking the cultural norms and creating connection from them. Now, trauma, as many people would define it, it's not the experience itself. It's our response to a certain experience, right? Two people can go through the same exact physical thing, and it depends how we respond. And what makes a trauma is that the intensity is too overwhelming for us to feel. We don't feel safe feeling it, or we're not held properly as a child to feel through the terror of something. And so the only response we have is to push it away from our system so that the rest of our system isn't overwhelmed. Now, this creates a different kind of reaction or response to the memory system, right? Sometimes we put that so in the shadow to not be overwhelmed that it becomes an unconscious memory. And only after years of doing therapy do you suddenly remember this thing that happened when you were 4 years old, and it's a big unlock. Or you can remember it, but the trauma response to remembering it is every time I remember it, my nervous system goes into activation and it feels like it's still there. And that's where the body keeps the score, because that part of the brain is stuck at that age still, responding as if I'm still a 5-year-old every time I think about that thing, and my body will start shaking or going into dissociation or overwhelm or anger or whatever. When someone works through trauma, or they work through, with therapy or otherwise, they are in whatever pacing is safe for them. They're bringing that material in to actually finally have it metabolized and have it brought in so that the nervous system can actually feel safe moving that kind of intensity. And so, a metaphor that I like is that you're unfreezing, you're thawing parts of the system that had to freeze because they were too intense. So you still need, like for any kind of complex trauma, you still need to have this technology of the episodic memory, but it's a very specific subset where it goes from momentary skillfulness to something that in the long term is not actually serving your well-being. And this frozenness creates responses where you treat the whole world as if it was the same as it was 30 years ago. And that really cuts off a lot of possibility.
Yeah. And according to Mike Johnson, at least, this could have to do with these vascular latches that are held in place, which we heard a lot about this week.
Yeah, it's a really powerful idea.
Yeah. So the last dimension.
There's two more.
There's two more. Okay.
We just did five.
We just did five.
Personality.
The sixth one.
The sixth one is thought. And so I have a personality, I have relationships. And the other thing that comes from a personality is not only am I feeling the tribal relationships, but I have a unique position in this tribe, right? Society has thousands of different roles now that function together to make us a complex society. Now, from that place, that starts with pack animals in a really simple way, where we start to have differentiated roles, alpha and beta roles and stuff. However, it can get much more complicated. And the main tool that does that is that we can conceptually think. Like dogs communicate through barking, and those are very low-level language syntax to inform them to hunt in certain ways or to, treat each other. They have raw language to get information across, but it's very concrete. There's probably like 10 words in the language. Once we learned to organize those sounds into longer and longer streams and all the phonemes to create an alphabet, to create structural language, just think about the detailed conversation we're having right now. So this is the flow of thought, and when we're talking, it's the flow of language externally, but it depends on the same architecture. I have to be able to conceptualize, symbolize, and what that is, if you really look at it, is in one frame, it's the coordination or the correlation between sequences of sound and perceptual references. So if I say right now, elephant, I made 3 phoneme sounds, and everyone's mind blinked a vision of a perception. Yeah. What an amazing thing, right?
This is a magic spell.
It's a magic, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And there's the classic Buddhist thing, like stop thinking about an elephant. Like you can't do it. I just incepted it in your mind and you can't help it without really advanced training. So that's what it is. It's the correlation between sequences of sounds and percepts, at least in one way to frame it. And this is incredibly potent and powerful technology, right? I can now sequence Shakespeare. I can now sit in my head for 5 hours fuming about a conversation that happened the previous day. So it's got side effects, right? But the potency is that now I can actually internally create virtual realities. And now I can compare those virtual realities to my reality in front of me. So notice up until this, that doesn't exist. You don't need that for all the things that we've been talking about so far. But once I can create counterfactuals, these other virtuals, now I can orient myself to them. And what we see in the massive explosion of technology is that I can make plans that are really detailed. I can have conversations and we can make a business plan that's going to take us a year to correlate millions of activities for one goal. And that doesn't exist in the animal kingdom until this moment.
Yeah. So thought gives us all these affordances. It allows us to make plans. It allows us to have complex conversations, but it also has some of these failure modes where we can almost fall into like a virtual representation of the world. We can fall into like other people's scripts. We can think about things that we don't even realize that we are thinking about, and then that can dictate our lives in less conscious ways. I'm sure there's so much more we could say about thought, but that's Levar number 6.
Yeah, that's Levar 6. You elucidated the side effects quite well. I mean, before my depression, it was insomnia because I'd think and I couldn't fall asleep because the thinking wouldn't stop analyzing the day.
Yeah.
And a lot of us know this pretty well. It's, we run little sub-circuits. And I would say that's one of the core reasons I made the map is to help realize that all of these things, as they evolve, have side effects that are unplanned, that are responses to the environment, and in this case, to the power of the mind to create thought. It's so potent to be able to do that we don't realize that it's odd that it can't turn off.
Yeah. Yeah. It reminds me of I think it's like the opening of Eckhart Tolle's A New Earth, or maybe The Power of Now, but he talks about how he sees someone on the subway who's just speaking out loud, like a schizotypal person, incessantly just like saying things to like random people, just like nonstop. And he's like, oh, this is a crazy person. And then he realizes as he goes up about his day that he's doing exactly the same thing, but he's just not opening his mouth. And then it just dawns on him that there's like a crazy person inside. Like he just can't shut up, and thoughts are just constantly streaming. And if you're used to that, if that's like the water that you're swimming in and you don't know that you're wet, then you have no idea that there are alternatives available. And I guess mindfulness practice is one way to taste that.
Yeah, I would say the kind of like first move of awakening, which is a big word that means a lot of different things, but to realize that the flow of thought in your mind isn't you is such a huge shift
Yeah.
that it can be easily mistaken for like full enlightenment. It's like, this like ideal of something, but it's like, it's just the first step. It's like, oh wow, this is a technology that's running here. And in between those thoughts, I'm still here in the same way. So it can't be my identity, but every time it speaks, it talks about me.
Yes.
And I conflate it talking about me to me.
Yeah.
And that's a really dangerous
It's
bind.
like a quirk of language more than anything.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think this is a good example of how the map itself has a somewhat psychoactive quality to it, because when you disambiguate thought as its own thing, and then you're kind of like laddering up the whole system and realizing that it took until level 6 for thoughts to even enter the picture, you realize there's so much more to your experience than just the words that are going on in your head.
Totally. It's the most recent guy at the party, but it thinks it's the party.
It thinks it's the main thing. Okay, so there's one more.
Yeah. So now we've seen thought, and we've seen the potency of it, and we've seen the side effects of it. And one of the outgrowths, if you look at the earliest thought, it's very concrete. It's like, this is a tree, and this is a Daniel, and this is a job. And then I can start to think about thinking. I can be like, oh, I'm naming objects. How am I doing that? Or like, what would I need to do to study better? So now there's like thinking about thinking, which is a little different from just concrete thinking. If I take that to its logical end, I start to get to Levar 7, which is just witnessing that these things are happening. And so I can witness the stream of thought, which is this mindfulness practice. I can witness the flow of emotion, but I can also witness that Jeffness, the flow of personality, the structure of personality is coming up on Levar 5. And I can even witness that there's a coordinate system arising. And that's a very subtle one. But Levar 7, this witnessing perspective, is the most recent thing in our evolution, the ability to look back inward at all of the other structures, which is, a couple thousand years old when we started self-referencing in that way. And that is a kind of a big turn in our history. And that's where I think spirituality and basically looking inward truly starts in a different way that's not just more conceptualization on Levar 6. And so that begins spiritual practice in earnest.
Yeah, and perhaps one like Q, it's like if you decouple from thoughts, for instance, and you just notice them as things that are taking place and you don't identify with them, it almost feels like you're watching something projected on like a movie screen as opposed to like being in the movie. It's like there's some sort of distance feeling that I think a lot of people are familiar with once they realize like, oh yeah, I'm just lost in thought. You're describing that happening with all aspects of experience, where there's this background awareness upon which everything else is like being cast. I know we could talk about this on its own for like multiple podcasts, but one thing maybe I thought this was a little bit confusing when I first heard this, but what's different about that from the first level, the first Levar, which is just the lights being on in the first place?
Yeah, in some sense, in the end of it, it's not different at all, because all of this stuff is just light. It's just different configurations of light. And in some sense, it's the most separate thing that, in this weird Pac-Man way that's really hard to describe in any short amount of time, it brings us back to the fact that this sense of knowing that seems totally separate from everything is actually made up of exactly the same thing as the stuff that it's knowing. And this is where this idea of non-duality comes from. It seems like there's a separate knower subject seeing all these objects, and it's way beyond the ability for me to know how to even talk about this in a short amount of time. But with witnessing, there's this like, oh, I'm not this, I'm not this, I'm not this. Well, what am I? Actually folds back into, I'm the entire arising of this thing. And at Levar 1, the knowing is intrinsic to the arising of the wakefulness. It's not a separate wakefulness seeing the stuff. It's just experiencing itself.
Yeah.
Only when you start to get to Levar 3 do you have a sense of something separate seeing stuff.
Yeah.
And the trick is that that's built out of things knowing themselves.
Right.
And so it's one of the deepest paradoxes, which I think people have tried to talk about for 2,000 years, and it's very hard to put into language. It's an experiential shift.
Yeah. We're going to get kicked out in a second, so maybe something to close on. If someone's listening to this and maybe they even had the experience I had by just deconstructing their experience with these different 7 dimensions, they feel like there's something here. It seems real. What might you suggest to them for how to maybe apply this practically, or what they might do with this map. How might you use it?
Yeah, I think on one level, just getting aware of the flow of thought and getting more aware of the constant flow of sensation in the body that has an emotional quality to it is life-changing on its own.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not lost in that content. I'm observing that content. That is a huge shift that anyone can start to practice on their own. If they're really interested in this, they can get involved in whatever spiritual tradition is resonant for them. And I hope that this creates a bridge for the fact that spiritual traditions are not doing anything weird or out of the realm of our paradigm. They're actually trying to deeply understand the information processing pathway of our perception. What a cool, amazing thing, because that's not conceptual. That is perceptual, that is internal. So they can look into that. I follow Tibetan Buddhism. I think it's one of the most tried and true lineages. It's 1,000 years of people, teacher to student lineage. And then if they want to get more deep into the emotional stuff, they can go to sleepawake.camp and come to one of our immersives and actually feel all this stuff in relationship.
Amazing. Jeff, thank you so much for your time today. This was an amazing conversation.
Thanks so much, Daniel. It's good to be with you.
Yeah. We did it.
We did it.
We did it. All right. We didn't get kicked out. We did.